The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Welcome to Compass. I'm Les Heen. This week we look at how renewable energy can play a role in local institutions and communities. The University of Minnesota Morris has been working on renewable energy planning and development for many years. These efforts also include, of course, the community of Morris itself, because there's a relationship there. Here now to talk about how renewable energy is working in the university and in the community, we have Troy Goodnow. Troy is from the University of Minnesota Morris, and he's the sustainability director there. And also from the city of Morris, we have the city manager, Blaine Hill. Troy, Blaine, thanks for joining us on Compass.
Thanks, Les.
Troy, I'd like to start with you because of your work as sustainability director on campus. For people who might not be familiar with the University of Minnesota Morris, tell us what sustainable energy is for the University of Minnesota Morris. What does it mean?
Right. So for us, we have a big goal, which is to be carbon neutral by 2020. And so the Morris campus for the past decade has been working really hard to install a wide variety of clean energy pieces of technology in the community and do as much energy conservation as possible. So what's really unique about Morris is there are very few places, I think, in the world and even in the country where within about a mile from Morris you can see wind turbines, biomass, solar thermal, solar PV, green buildings, all in one location, just in one visit to Morris. And so if you come to Morris, that's what you'd see. So it means the fact that the campus gets 70% of its electricity from wind every year, from two very large 1.65 megawatt wind turbines that blow there, supported by the prairie breezes that blow along the Pomme de Terre River. So it's a diversity of resources: wind, biomass, solar.
And some of those things, as you mentioned, wind towers are very easy to see. Yeah. But some of the things that might not be necessarily as easy to see are, let's say, the Welcome Center building that has, LEED certification for energy efficiency, or the biomass area on the edge of campus. Because you've also done some work with trying to figure out things like corn stover,
right,
and other things.
That's right. So two examples you pointed out. One is, and this is the most important place to start, is energy conservation. And clean energy technologies are sexy, so oftentimes they get the most attention. But if you come to the Morris campus, the very building you pointed out, the Green Prairie building, Green Prairie Community Residence Hall, which was our first built since the 1970s, one of the sexiest things you can't see is the insulated concrete form construction that basically the building was built with. So it's really insulated. And so that's not something that we often think about, is if we have one choice to make a building last for 100 years, put that money into insulation. So we are really thinking about, you also mentioned the Welcome Center, which is another LEED Gold building. And what's unique about that is it was a historic building. So we renovated it, gutted it completely, and brought it into 21st century energy standards, which required a commitment to basically its environmental and energy design. And so that's on the building side and the energy conservation side, and there's lots more to say about that. But then there's also this question of, how do we use some of our local resources other than just wind, which is abundant. And so that's why we, back in the 2000s, we saw natural gas prices going all over the place. Tripled, I think, in price and ate away the reserve budget at Morris. And it really started this community conversation about how could we make energy another way? How could we heat another way? And that led to our progress in biomass gasification and biomass in general. Some very large grants from the USDA, Department of Energy, which put us on a path towards exploring biomass as you got to heat and you need electricity, and that was our heating path.
So Blaine, I want to bring you into this conversation because, of course, as a city manager, a city of about 5,000 people, and you have a major institution as the University of Minnesota Morris, they've been doing a lot of this stuff, but what are the implications for the community, as Troy mentioned, when you have a renewable energy partner in your community like that?
Well, I think the interesting part about the university is just the knowledge that you have access to. So they got started early with working on this stuff, and we had an opportunity to start seeing some of the things that they were working on and how they may apply to us as a city. And then at the time, as a city manager, you have to look out for resources, and when you can find out about something like changing to LED lights, and not only doing it, but actually saving money in the long run, that is something that is really interesting to somebody like me, and it's really a no-brainer kind of decision. But we have been partnered with them on a lot of different things. I've had interns come in and work with me and just city government kind of things, and so it was natural that we started working with them on this kind of stuff. And it's amazing to me. I've been city administrator. This is my 29th year now, and this is probably the most fun I've had working on something because you really get a chance to see things that you can do that make a big difference for the future. And that's one of the phrases I like to use is, this is something for the future. So reducing the amount of energy you use is actually a good thing to do, but to get it from a source that's renewable, that you don't have to worry about moving into the future, is a good thing for everybody. And they're information providers. That's, as a university, they teach information, and as a city, we have an access to that we other cities don't have.
Well, of course, you meet with many other city managers in your job. You talk with other city managers. So can you give me an idea of some of the lessons that you've learned that you think other cities could perhaps consider, because they don't necessarily have the university there, but you've learned lessons that could be applied elsewhere?
Actually, I'll share something that happened at our League of Minnesota Cities conference, where I was actually talking to one of my colleagues, and they said, well, you're not politically going to be able to sell electric vehicles to public works departments in Minnesota that use pickup trucks. If you go to Germany, you will not see pickup trucks. I made 2 trips to Germany. I saw 3 pickup trucks in Germany. I mean, I'm not kidding about that, because they use vehicles that are made for the purpose that they're using them for, not just to buy a vehicle that's on the market. And so when you start looking at the fleet that you have, and why do you have that fleet, and what's it used for, if you could get a 6-wheel, say, Polaris electric vehicle that you could use in your park system to haul garbage around and even put a trailer on and haul a mower over to the park, those things don't cost probably a third of what a pickup truck costs. And those are things that city administrators probably wouldn't think about, but once you share that with them, then they do start thinking about it, that this is something that you can do. And obviously there's things like LED lights in buildings or street lights. We spend a lot of money on street lights in the community, and now they're finally being converted over to LED lights, and the energy use is so much less. It just makes sense to look at doing that. But we learn all those lessons about how you use buildings and how you heat them, how you cool them, and then we can apply that to other communities.
Blaine, you touched on the partnership with Germany. I know you brought along a book about the city of Saarbeck. I want to sure I get the name right, but you've had this partnership, I know that both of you have, with Germany. And Troy, I'd like to turn to you and tell us about this partnership and what it's meant to the lessons you've learned.
Yeah, so the partnership with Germany has been one of the most exciting things that I think has happened at the university. And specifically,
it's partnership with the city of Saarbeck, right?
That's right. So it's part of a larger initiative that people can look online and see called the Climate Smart Municipalities Program. It's engineered through the University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment, pairing 5 cities in Minnesota with 5 cities in Germany. And so as of last week, we had multiple people from the city of Morris in Saarbeck, in Dusseldorf, in several cities along the Rhine River in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. But Morris was, because of Blaine's leadership in the city council in Morris, they signed the first climate protection agreement with the city, from a city in Minnesota with a city in North Rhine-Westphalia. And so we're partnered with Saarbeck, which is an amazing small town, 7,000 people, make 250% more power than their community needs, have an innovative bioenergy park. And so you always talk about how we're kind of catching a glimpse of the future in Zarbeck. And so it's been, I think, really helping us to shape our aspirations about, even though Morris, we think, is a model destination, ag and energy tourism destination, we're catching a glimpse of our own future when we travel to Germany.
Which begs the question, what is the future? I mean, now you've really whet our appetite here, Troy. So you're going to have to follow through on this one. Give us the crystal ball.
Right, the crystal ball. I think in some ways what you're going to see is that when you head into small towns, and I think people are talking about this, but when you head into a small community, right on as you head into the town, you're going to see a lot more community-generated energy for a variety of reasons. And so recently, the Morris community had something called the Rural Climate Dialogues meeting in the town. And one of the main outcomes of that meeting with about 100 people is they talked about what was important to them was also local ownership. And so I think whether you're the city or you're the university or you're the chamber, most of us are really interested in also local ownership and building local wealth. And so I think what you're going to see is when you come into a community, they're going to have a better sense of how many kilowatt hours does the city, whatever that city is, how many kilowatt hours do they use every year? What are their thermal needs? And they're going to be starting to address that with the diversity of technologies that basically add money back into their local economy, whether it's wind or solar or biomass, or really thinking about their buildings in a different way. That's what the future is going to look like. And what's a lot different between Germany and Morris, Germany and Minnesota, is the pricing that gets you there.
Tell us about that, Blaine.
Well, so what happens if gasoline goes up to $4 or $5 a gallon? What happens if natural gas gets very expensive and you can't afford to use it anymore? What happens if electricity gets very expensive and you can't afford to buy it anymore? And that might seem like something that's not going to happen, but coal's going to go away, oil's going to go away sometime in the future. And that's what Germany experienced. And then on top of that, they realized that nuclear energy was something that they didn't want in their backyard. So they are decommissioning all their nuclear power plants by 2022. So they will not have any nuclear energy. And they realized that they could create their own energy that's sustainable, renewable, and actually they can afford to be able to have energy for the future. We're not going to have energy like we have now for the future. I think everybody understands that. It's going to run out at some point in the future. And now we've got a chance to see what it's like if we did run out of affordable energy. And so we can actually start before we even have to worry about it, doing the things that we need to do. And actually, the one thing I would tell you is that we have great resources in our country and we squander them. We waste them. Whether it's how big a house is, how much energy you use in a house. We had a group of people that were over in Germany for a week sitting in meetings. I guarantee you none of those meeting rooms had air conditioning because they don't air condition their buildings in Germany because they can't afford to run air conditioners, let alone having the lights and stuff on. And it's just learning to use the resources that you have wisely for the future. That's one of the things that we're experiencing right now. We get a chance to see what that's like. Electric vehicles are going to be coming. They are coming. We rode in one today, and that can get recharged by energy that is produced by the university. And so it's here today. And so that's one of the things that we get a glimpse into that window of what it's like. And at the same time, like I said, Germans learn early on in kindergarten. They start learning where energy comes from and how you use it, and they limit the amount that they actually wind up needing to live. And we haven't got to that point yet.
Well, Troy, you touched on the idea or mentioned the idea of local and local. And Blaine, you talked about, waste or using what we have. So a common economic development term is about keeping dollars local. So it seems that there's a sense here that part of what goes on between not wasting and using, that Blaine, is this the sort of thing where for a lot of people to frame it, and economically, it would be also about keeping more of your energy expenditures local, potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, one of the interesting questions I had that came up. I think it was one of the mayor or one of the city council members from Alexandria was talking about whether or not we could do district heating, which is something that they do in Germany all the time. It's like, would that be possible to do that here? And it's like, well, the university has district heating. They have a power plant that uses corn cobs to make energy, to make heat, and the school system is right next to the university, and the hospital is right next to the university, and both of those could have their heating system come from that same system. Yeah. You know, where we just don't think about it as much here, but Duluth, Rochester, they all have district heating, and it was a good way of running pipes and stuff in the old days, and so that is something that we can look at doing, even in Morris, and we don't, you know, one of the terms I like to use is the culture. We need a culture change so that we know and understand exactly what we're doing, and I would add to that garbage is getting very expensive, and our garbage bills are probably going to start going way up. Yet at the same time, the easiest way to deal with garbage is not make garbage. You know, almost everything is recyclable, to where the university does organic composting of all their food waste in their facility, where our school doesn't do that yet. Our homes, we don't do that yet, but we could. And then we'd have to find a place to put compost, but I'm pretty sure in farm country you could figure that out really quick.
It's a little bit like, you know, we haven't talked about the fact that Germany also uses, I know, a great deal of methane and methane digesters. So I mean, there were some inherent questions here about agriculture and the relationship to agriculture, whether that's, you know, a solar array placed on a farm, or a wind turbine placed on a farm, or using methane digesters. I mean, there are a whole series of options here that go beyond the city of Morris, let's say, or the city of Sarback, to the farms that are surrounding them. Is that what you saw in Germany?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. I mean, I think so. Minnesota doesn't have any fossil fuel, and I think that's something that everyone should know. We don't have any natural gas. We don't have any petroleum. We don't have any coal. In Germany, it has a little bit of coal, but the point is they're somewhat restricted in energy too. So they are really thinking about, in their agricultural areas, how do they basically create value for farmers? And so if you visit the bioenergy park in Sarback, which we've both been to in this recent delegation, what you're going to see is they're using all kinds of different biomass-related feedstocks to make energy. So for example, they take a mixture of manure slurries and mix it all together and make methane gas that runs an electric generator. And so this is economic opportunity for them using something that they have in their already have in their community. That's right.
Yeah, and scalability also as well, because when you mention things like central heating or district heating, again, St. Paul, you'll see that, or you mentioned Rochester, a number of these communities. So is the scalability of some of these things possible for smaller communities, but Blaine, we just haven't really been thinking that way?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple different things, you know, because we built our infrastructure, and that's one of the things that I find interesting as a city administrator, where you talk about city planning and developing a community. Well, if you're already built, it's kind of hard to go back and dig everything up and redo it. You know, so like in the case of the hospital and the school system, they are in the right spots to be able to maybe take advantage of that. But there are places where you could maybe do it in the downtown area and then run the piping that you need. It's actually easier to run probably district heating piping in Minnesota than it is running water lines or sewer lines, because we have to worry about things freezing, where district heating piping, you don't have to worry about that. So I think, you know, probably the most interesting thing for me that I've seen being part of all this is originally when the Duluth and Rochester utility people came on board and started looking at this stuff, and right away, you know, and I've been around utilities, and they tend to have their own ways of doing things, and typically their boards are older boards and things like that. But when they started seeing this, you know, it just opened their eyes up to be able to do some of the things that maybe they never thought they could ever think about doing, and now they are doing them. You know, Duluth negotiates a new power contract. I think it was a 5-year power contract instead of 30 years. And then Rochester, obviously with the Mayo Clinic, They're putting in a solar farm and they're doing all kinds of things like that. But you can scale it down to smaller cities. And that's one of the things that we are very interested in doing, is figuring out the answers for us. The hardest thing for us as the city of Morris is we do not own the electric company.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because when we look at the history of energy production in small towns, there were a lot of cities who early on, as they were developing, had to figure out some of their own energy solutions because they were perhaps well off the beaten path, there wasn't access to power, so they had to come up with their own solutions. And whether that was a local waterfall providing hydroelectric, whatever it may have been. And so I'd like to ask both of you, starting with you, Blaine, is that sort of what we could see again, is sort of, cities, returning to that creativity of figuring out some of their own solutions?
Absolutely, and you already are. That's the interesting part, and I like to make sure that we share that, because you're seeing that all across Minnesota. I drove from Alec to Morris and took the back roads and saw a solar farm just outside of Starbuck. I still haven't found out who owns it, but that's just, right down the road from us. And I think communities across the state are starting to look at what can we do, whether it's LED lights in the town or putting in a solar. I know there's one community who's talking about somebody donated land to put in a solar farm. And now they have to work with the power company to be able to do that. But yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more of that, and you're already seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're seeing, Troy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so I think one part of the equation is, as cities become more energy literate, I think that's why it's exciting working with the city, the collaboration we have through what we call the Morris model. So if people go online, they can look at morrismodel.org. But we've got a bunch of community partners, the city, the university, the schools, the hospital, public health, others. And so we're all kind of working together. But one of those goals is to have a better sense of what is a kilowatt, what is kilowatt hour. So once you kind of understand that need, then you can start to put the puzzle pieces together of how you would meet that need. And for cities that have utilities, it's also a time where we're having a conversation with our utilities about how we work together in new ways to basically pursue some of the dreams, the goals that we have for ourselves. But the other thing I would say is, what has also changed in the last 10 years is the cost landscape, right? So you've got utilities now, and we've got one of our local utilities, Otter Tail Power. I think their most recent resource plan says that they expect to be 30% clean energy by 2021. Minnesota already last year hit its benchmark of 25% renewable energy from utilities by 2025. That's 7 or 8 years ahead of schedule. So, and the reason why these utilities are doing it is because renewables are the lowest cost option. Now that might not have been true, or wasn't true 10 years ago, but so there's this lag between the time, that kind of between people really understanding how the landscape has already shifted. So it's not 10 years ago now, right?
Well, and also getting back to what you mentioned earlier, that in Minnesota we are a state or people that has historically had to buy our energy from someone else. And so as we started, let's just say ethanol, for example. Okay, ethanol, we started to generate ethanol, now we have E85, and so there have been these steps toward figuring out what do we do to keep some of those dollars local and generate that electricity. And this seems to be just another wave of that.
It's absolutely complementary to our agriculture, landscape, our agricultural economies, right? I mean, we've seen funny posters from things like Windustry where they show a turbine and say "milk this." Basically, it's just one more thing we can farm, right? Is energy, and so.
Yeah, so it's a good idea, and I just want to say we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure we touch on the idea of, for people who are interested in this and want to find out more, advice and next steps. So, Blaine, I want to start with you on this one. So, advice to small cities and where they should go to learn more.
Well, they can go to morrismodel.org, and that's the website that some students created at the university to keep track of all the stuff that we're working on. But I think in general, there's some cities in Minnesota like Morris and Elk River and Warren and Duluth and Rochester that are working on the climate stuff. The University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment is working directly with the German government on the program that we're part of right now. So there's good information there, and actually in Morris, West Central Research and Outreach does research on energy on farms, and you know, the vehicle I talked about that was an electric vehicle, they actually have them working on farms. They don't need a pickup truck. So there's different places like that you can go to, and there's more and more of that information coming out all the time.
We invite people to take a tour of Morris, right?
Come to the campus.
Yeah, come to our community.
Yeah.
That's right. We love people to come to the community. We believe Morris, the community, is a clean energy and ag destination. And so whether it's going to a farm energy conference at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, or there's an upcoming solar congress coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good point to end on. Wish we had more time. Troy Goodenough from the University of Minnesota Morris and Blaine Hill from the City of Morris, thank you for joining us on Compass.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks for watching, and join us next week.